Hello friends and welcome back. So today we will discuss about hypervisor attacks and how to mitigate them. In our previous videos we have already discussed what is a hypervisor, types of hypervisor and its role in managing virtual machines. So you can go and watch that video for better understanding. Hypervisor attacks. As we have already discussed, hypervisors are backbone in server virtualization, acting as an intermediary between virtual machines and the physical hardware. They allow multiple virtual machines to run on a single physical machine by using hypercalls. A hypercall is a mechanism used in virtualization to facilitate communication between the virtual machines and the hypervisor. And these are similar to system calls but specific to virtualized environments. So what is a system call? A system call is a mechanism used by programs to request services from operating systems. In simple terms, a user program can interact with the operating system using a system call. A number of services are requested by the program and the operating system responds by launching a number of system calls to fulfill the request. So we need to understand system calls in details before we can move ahead to hypervisor attacks. Let's understand it with an example. Suppose you want to print any document. You give a command to print the document, but the program doesn't directly control the printer, right? It makes a system call to the operating system saying, "Hey operating system, I need to print this document." And then the operating system sends data over the printer and get it printed. So hypercall is similar to system call but specific to virtualized environments. Now let's understand more about hypercall attacks. Suppose an attacker gains access to virtual machines in a cloud environment and crafts a series of malicious hypercalls designed to exploit a buffer overflow vulnerability in the hypervisor's memory management function. So what is buffer overflow vulnerability? Buffer overflow or buffer overrun is an anomaly whereby a program writes data to a buffer beyond the buffer's allocated memory, overwriting adjacent memory locations. A buffer is a temporary storage area in any program's memory. When a program tries to load more data into a buffer that it can hold, that extra data spills over into adjacent memory locations, and which can lead to unexpected behaviors like crashing the system or allowing attackers to gain control of the system. I have covered buffer overflow vulnerability in details with some real-life examples in my earlier video, which you can go and watch for better understanding. Let's take an example and understand how buffer overflow vulnerability is exploited by attackers. The first step for attacker is to identify a program with a buffer overflow vulnerability and exploit it by sending more data than the buffer can hold. By overflowing the buffer, the attacker can overwrite the return address with their own malicious code address. When the program finishes its task, it doesn't return to its intended location. Instead, it jumps to the attacker's code, which was embedded in the overflow data, right? This code executes with the same privileges as the original program, granting the attacker unauthorized access to the system. I hope now you have understood the buffer overflow vulnerability and how this attack happens. Now moving to hypervisor attacks. Hypervisor attacks involve exploiting vulnerabilities in the hypervisor to gain unauthorized access, inject malicious code, or disrupt service. Let's understand some of the hypervisor attacks. Hypercalls exploitation. As we already know, hypercalls are used by VMs to request services from the hypervisor. An attacker controlling a virtual machine within the same cloud infrastructure can create fake hypercalls. And by crafting malicious hypercalls, they can attempt to exploit vulnerabilities in the hypervisor. And the impact is, it can lead to the injection of malicious code, potentially compromise the confidentiality and integrity of other virtual machines, or even crashing the hypervisor, right? Virtual machine escape. It occurs when an attacker manages to break out of the isolated environment of a virtual machine and gain access to the hypervisor or other virtual machines. And this can be achieved through vulnerabilities in the hypervisor software or through misconfigured virtual machine settings, right? And the impact is, once escaped, the attacker can potentially control other virtual machines, access sensitive data, or disrupt services, right? Denial of service. These attacks aim to make the hypervisor or its hosted virtual machines unavailable to legitimate users. This can be done by overloading the hypervisor with malicious hypercalls or resource requests. And the impact is the hypervisor may become overloaded, leading to performance degradation or complete service outage. Denial of service via hypercalls. Overloading the hypervisor with an excessive number of hypercalls, consuming CPU and memory uses. This can degrade performance or cause the hypervisor to become unresponsive, affecting all virtual machines running on it. So what are some of the mitigation strategies to safeguard against hypervisor attacks? Let's discuss. Security audits and compliance. Conduct regular security audits to ensure that the hypervisor and its configuration adhere to the best practices and security standards. Include a clause in contracts with the cloud service providers that grants the enterprise the right to audit the cloud infrastructure and processes. And ensure compliance with industry standards and regulation to maintain a secure virtualized environment. Hypervisor hardening. Keep the hypervisor software updated with the latest security patches to protect against known vulnerabilities. Implement strict access control policies to limit who can interact with the hypervisor and perform administrative tasks. Network segmentation. Isolate critical virtual machines. Segment the network to isolate critical virtual machines from less secure environments. This limits the potential impact of a compromised virtual machines. Use firewalls and virtual lanes. Deploy firewalls and virtual local area networks to create barriers between different segments of the network. Monitoring and detection. Deploy intrusion detection systems to monitor for suspicious activity at the hypervisor level, and regularly analyze logs from the hypervisor and virtual machines to detect unusual patterns or potential attack indicators. Resource management. Set limits on the resources that each virtual machine can consume to prevent any single virtual machine from consuming all resources and potentially causing a denial of service condition, right? So these were some of the mitigation strategies which you can use to prevent hypervisor attacks. Hypervisor attacks present significant risks to virtual environments, potentially compromising the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of hosted virtual machines. So guys, this is all we have for today. I hope you found this video insightful. Please like and share it with your friends. Subscribe to our channel for regular updates. Consider joining me on LinkedIn. See you soon with another topic, another video. Till then, take care. Bye-bye.